The purpose of this interview is to record oral history of an Italian who immigrated to Canada, which will be added to the website of the Italian Heritage Project. Quote, "The purpose of our study is to engage in community outreach with Italian Canadian immigrants and to document their stories and experiences of immigration from Italy to Canada. We encourage individuals and families, communities and organizations to share historical items, documents, letters, and photos that capture the experiences of Italians in Canada. Our main focus is to create connections with Italian Canadian immigrant participants who immigrated to southwestern Ontario, to record the personal and in-depth narratives of individuals who are willing to share their reflections and invaluable lived experiences. We will be creating an informative and visual report using the artifacts you have shared with the interviewer to illustrate your personal story. This is a means of preserving your experience specifically and the Italian Canadian immigration experience in general. By documenting these historical items, we hope to connect the events of the past with the lived experiences of actual people. We thank you for your participation and your willingness to contribute to our collection." End quote.
Okay, look forward to it.
I immigrated with my parents. They wanted a better life and better. It was a hard life where they were because there was no running water. My dad had to go away to make ends meet, and so we never really saw him that much. Maybe once a year at Christmas, at least for the first 6, 7 years of my life. He wasn't really around. My mom actually drove the family. She cut the wheat. She did all that stuff, and she took care of us. Even though she couldn't read or write, but she was very good at managing the house and taking care of the children. We had 4 children altogether. I believe my mom said that she had 3 miscarriages. So it was a very hard life because everything was done by hand. Everything she had to go get the water at the fountains by hand, the bread, taking care of the goat and the pig, and all that kind of stuff. Everything was basically, we lived in one room and with the chicks and all this stuff in the stall next door every day that they came in. So they came to Canada for a better life, and so we emigrated in 1967. It was sponsored by my uncle that was sponsored by my dad for Switzerland, and he said, if I go to Canada, I will sponsor you. So we ended up in a little mining town called Red Lake, Ontario, in the northwest Ontario near the Manitoba border. And my dad was able to secure a job working at the mine almost immediately after he did his physical. And he worked there until he got sick and he couldn't work anymore at age 55. I wasn't personally because I was only a child, and but we used to get letters from Canada, and I always joked that I was trilingual even before I came because the envelope said par avion by air mail, so I could do that. I could French, English, and my Italian that I could. So that was a fun thing. But no, we came here and we basically. Lived with my uncle's family that had 6 kids at the time. We lived in a tar paper shack for about 3 months until we were able to rent our own place and go from there. We were very fortunate that my whole family, my sister was 18 at the time, my older sister, and my mom and dad all secured jobs, all got jobs, so we were able to move ahead. But with no education, it was very, very tough and couldn't speak the language. But that being said, my mom still did everything. She used to go shopping. She used to do all the stuff that to take care of the family. And we don't know how she did it, but she did it. And that's just the way. She was very resourceful, and that's just the way it was back then. You had to do because there was no hand up and no handout, I should say. So if you didn't work, you didn't eat, and if the way the situation was is if you didn't get a job, then your sponsor had to support you. So it's not like today, so.
What did your siblings and your parents do for jobs when they came over here?
Well, my dad worked at the mine at Campbell Red Lake Gold Mines, and he was underground, and my mom worked at a bakery. She used to get up at 3 o'clock every morning, and my sister worked these were no glamorous jobs. She worked in a dry cleaning, doing all that kind of stuff, and So, we made ends meet that, and the family moved forward, and we thank God every day for moving across the pond, as they used to say, and we were able to, have a life that we have today. You had to go to all these visits for back then. It was like all these medical visits, and had to get all the paperwork. And my dad actually had to borrow $500 to pay for the trip over. And we came with the on a boat. So it was the name of the boat was Olympia from the Greek line. So we embarked in Naples, went around overnight, and I remember seeing the lights of Gibraltar as we went through, and then we spent 8 days on a fairly rough journey, and it was the first time I ever had a shower. My dad had to hold me under, and it was like, it was weird. It's just that, you get sick and all that kind of stuff, and then we landed in Halifax at Pier 21 in March 25th, 1967, and then we took a 2.5-day ride, train ride from there all the way to Red Lake, and then our cousin picked us up, which is 100 miles away from where we're going. So it was an interesting trip because for me it was an adventure, but for my parents that did not speak the language, I'm pretty sure they moved with a little trepidation on we're going to this new world, but they knew that the possibility of a better life was better than what they had at home, because there you work sun up to sundown, and you never knew if you were going to make ends meet because you were dependent on the weather and the little pieces of land that they had and all that kind of stuff. And so it was an interesting, because my dad was 43 years old at the time already, so he wasn't a young man. I mean, he was relatively, but not a young man to be able to go across half the world and start a new life, especially with 4 kids in tow.
Right.
So yeah.
What were the names of your family members?
My dad was named Vito, my mom was named Maria Giovanna, my sister Maria, and my second oldest sister was Vincenza. Of course, I'm Antonio, and then I had a 1.5-year-old at the time. He was Gerardo. Well, we were from the south, which is the ancient name of the land that we come from is Lucania, but today it's known as La Basilicata. And basically, the region is La Basilicata. The province is the capital is Potenza, and excuse me. And so we basically come from the if you were to look at the boot of Italy, from the ankle bone of Italy in the Apennines, about 1,000 meters above sea level, and basically, you did your best. It was farming, but it was pretty hard to do farming there as well. So a lot of people went outside that area to get work, because it was known at the time, and may still be one of the poorest regions in Italy as far as resources and or jobs. They just weren't available. Mm. So it was an agrarian type of lifestyle, so it was very, very, could be very tough some days, some years. Well, when we came, we landed in Halifax, and I just remember this huge hangar room. Of course, being a little boy at 9 years old, everything was like huge. And then we got on a train, and we changed trains in Montreal, and we had a soup, and there was something. Then my mom had actually brought bread from the old country, so we ran out about halfway on this trip, and so my mom went to the not the bar car, but the restaurant car, and basically bought a loaf of bread. And we all come back and just said, we asked her, said, what did you buy? Did you buy like cookies? Because it tastes like cake, right? The sliced bread that we've never seen before, because everything was always homemade. And my mom, until she was 70 something years old, she was always making homemade bread anyways. And so it was very comforting to, when we would visit and stuff, that she would have this whole homemade biscotti or whatever peasant type food that I also learned how to make now for my family, and it's just basically very nutritious and very basic food, but it's very very nourishing at the same time. So it was landed in finally in Red Lake, and it was, of course it was March 27th, which was a couple 2.5 days later. And at that time, there was just ice and snow everywhere. So it was cold. It was miserable, and coming from a land of pretty decent weather to go to a land of snow and ice, it was like it was a little. It took a little bit to get used to. And of course, a lot of where we went, a lot of the houses still didn't have running water or toilets. They had these outhouses, and so we went from no running water with a toilet with an outhouse, and so it was interesting until about 10 years later when they actually the town decided to run the water and sewer lines across the town. So it was an interesting. The houses are very sparse compared to where we come from in Italy, and it was right in the, smack pretty much in the middle of Canada, in the middle of winter, considered winter at the time. But it was an opportunity, and so my dad took it.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was Red Lake like, the community that you settled in? Were there other Italian or European immigrants that you met?
Yeah, there's actually, it was probably a town of immigrants. There was German, there was Hungarian, there was Polish, there was Ukrainians, there was Italians, and all from all different regions of Italy. There was all sorts of, and Greek and Yugoslavian at the time, and so we got, it was pretty multicultural at the time, but everybody had their own, but they all became Canadian. They loved the Canadian way of life, even though they kept their culture. So we actually shared in different ways and different foods, and so it was very very interesting. Of course, coming from Italy and not being able to speak the language at the time, some of my difficulties was, I got picked on a lot because, especially my name, the way it was, Massey, and so they called me names all the time, Tony Baloney and blah blah, all this stuff. So I got into a few scrapes, because coming, being proud Italian, I wasn't going to take anything lying down. So I got my licks in as much as I got licked that way. But generally, yeah, there was a little bit at that time. You could say maybe not discrimination, but more like there was a back and forth with different nationalities, and you had who was better, but it was a fun thing. But it did come a time that there was there was a few fisticuffs now and again, but that was a different time back then, not like today, right? So anyways. We did. My mom brought over a bunch of kitchen utensils that she was using, and I had the pleasure of scraping my knuckles on cheese, like hard, grating the cheese, and the coffee maker that you can have a picture. And of course, even her pasta. I forget what it's called, but a pasta. You'll see in the pictures, anyways. But
like a strainer?
yeah, no, to cut the pasta and stuff. And they call it paletta, right? But and then they also had the strainer, the hand. Everything was done by hand. There was no electric can opener or none of this. So we all pitched in when we made the tomatoes, made the sausage, made wine, all that kind of stuff. So it was it was not a sustenance kind of living, but we lived a lot of natural, clean foods and stuff like that. There was not a lot of processed food back then, so everything was homemade. So we have, and my dad brought a bunch of his farming utensils, like the scythe and the actual scythe for cutting wheat and stuff like that, and the hose. And the mini hoe, all the stuff that he used to use to make his great garden that he also used to have. My dad did. I didn't write letters because as a kid you don't really have a lot of back and forth with friends because you basically cut ties at that point. But my dad was always sending letters to his siblings and cousins and stuff in Italy, and I'm not sure if we have any of those still laying around, but I'd have to check. But they're just basically how are things. That's a way to communicate back then because phones were very very expensive. To be able to long distance was a very expensive endeavor at the time. So once in a while, you did get calls, and you got called, or you send a telegram and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, so there was communications until my dad, you basically couldn't write anymore. Otherwise, he did.
Would you be willing to allow those letters, should they be found, to be transcribed, studied, and made available to the wider community?
I don't see why not, because I mean, yeah, they were personal letters, but there was nothing that's really public that would be unpublic that would embarrass anybody. Anyways, it was just communicating back and forth.
And would you be willing to allow the photographs, family heirlooms, and other mementos to be studied and made available to the wider community?
I think it would be a great idea to discover and to understand how we used to live back then, even though it's only 55 plus years ago. But it's a lifetime generation away, and we're trying to impart that on our children as well, that they not forget about where we came from and all that kind of stuff. And you see my daughter here; she's taking Italian. So, and my other siblings speak perfect Italian, and nieces and nephews, they try, but as you get anglicized in our society, it's pretty tough to keep that going. Even though they try, and they're doing a pretty good job at it.
Okay. And would you be willing to share some of the photographs with us?
If we have them, sure, well, not a problem whatsoever. Well, Canada's home. I became a citizen way back 20 years old, 21, I guess, and I was very proud to be a Canadian, even though sometimes, it cost me $15 to pay for that, so I call myself a $15 Canadian. I don't know what it costs today, but it's just a running joke that we have, but I'm very proud of being Canadian, but with an Italian heritage, even though I was born in Italy. My allegiance is to Canada, even though, when the World Cup and stuff goes on, and I cheer for Italy at the same time, but I also cheer for Canada. So, and that kind of stuff. So Canada's my home. I've been here 55 plus years, and so Italy's a great place to visit, but I don't think I'd want to go back anyways.
Mm.
And we visited many times, right? So. I don't know if there's anything I would have done differently, because you're basically thrown into a situation where you have to learn the language, you have to make new friends, you have to go to school so you can, advance yourself and then help the rest of your family. I was the first one actually to graduate high school in my family and to finish college in my family. So that was a kind of a, I don't know if it's a proud moment, but it's an accomplishment that I'm proud of, anyways, because it was most of my family didn't get a chance to go to school, so it was very good to honor my parents, to be able to to see that yeah, you did good.
Yeah.
So now our children, here we are at university, which is even better to me. But
What were some of the jobs you had as you grew up in Canadian community?
Oh, okay. I had many jobs. One was a newspaper. I delivered newspapers. I worked as a construction when I was 15, 16. I delivered milk. I was that. And I worked in a furniture store. I delivered that during high school. And my final job during the high school years was working at the same mine that my dad was working at. And we actually got to go to work together. And not that we worked together, but we went on a bus together and came home together. It was kind of interesting that, it was an interesting job, but not one that I want to do the rest of my life, and that's why I kind of moved away from that area. So I went. That being said, I went to school. I finished college. I got my electronic engineering technician in electronics, and then because at that time electronics was moving so fast, and it just kind of, I kind of outgrew me, and then eventually I kind of went to different jobs, and then eventually 35 years ago I landed in the financial services industry, and it's been a fantastic journey on the financial side, to be able to support my family and grow a business that now my daughter, my oldest daughter, is involved in it. She's a part owner of the business. So I think we'd be here for hours if I did, because there are lots of little interesting stories, you know. But no, you have pretty much the the flavor of what I went through and grown up. And like I said, I'm a proud Canadian, and I'm proud to have a wonderful family, and that's very loving. And we're very close, and we have a lot of family fun times together, and it's been great. It's been great. That's all I can say.